Welcome to The Score, where we make sense of hiring trends, sort science from fiction, and find out what's new in talent acquisition from top experts in the field.
Hello, I'm Nicola Tatham. I'm the Chief IO Psychologist here at SOVA. I've got 2 decades of experience designing fair, predictive, and science-backed talent assessments. I'm here to cut through the noise and talk about what actually works in hiring.
And I'm Caroline Fry, Head of Product. I spend my time turning smart assessment ideas from Nick into tools that work. Scalable, inclusive, and ready for whatever AI throws at us next.
Usually we're joined by a guest to help us unpack a big question in hiring. But today's a bit different. There is no guest because Caroline and I have decided we want to interview each other.
Exactly. We've each come armed with a few questions for the other. No prep and no notes, so you'll get our most honest answers. I've got some things I've been meaning to ask Nick.
A few questions lined up for Caroline too. Let's see where this takes us.
So, as usual, before we start, I think it's only fair that we both discuss what's the strangest question we've ever been asked during an interview. So, Nick, what's the weirdest thing you've ever had?
2 examples. Well, no, I've got one example of something that I was asked, and I think it's more my response that will be more shocking to anyone that knows me than the question. So the question, I was being asked this by another psychologist. The question was, if you weren't a psychologist, what would you be? And my answer was, I would be a Formula One racing driver. Now, anyone that knows me knows that's certainly never going to be true. Feedback session afterwards, and the psychologist who'd interviewed me was giving me feedback, and they did ask me, is that something you are genuinely interested in then? Because now I don't know why I said it. And I did not get that job. Yeah. The other one, it's not something I was asked, but it was an anecdote that I heard at a social occasion, shall we say. So one of the attendees at this particular event was particularly proud of his own achievements in life, what he'd achieved and what his children were achieving, which is quite normal, quite natural. Mm-hmm. Well, I was very shocked when he explained to me that when his son had graduated, he'd applied for many, many jobs and he'd been put through these damn psychometric tests and he'd not got anywhere and never been offered a job. And he then finished this with, and do you know, when he applied to organisation X, he was simply asked where his father worked and what school he went to. And he got the job. Now, I don't think that the person that I met at this social event fully understood what my role was, what my job was, and what my motives were for doing what I do. But that really did talk to me, in my younger and early career. It did really make me think, what we're doing really does matter and is really important, and we really need to make some changes. And I do think we have made massive progress since then. But yeah, it was a bit of a shock, really, to me to hear somebody actually sharing that information and using it as a way of showing off about how great their children were. But yeah. Anyway, what about you? Have you got any strange interview questions?
Yeah, so mine aren't as good as yours. Mine are just a little, slightly odd. My first job was at a theme park when I was 16. And during the interview process, they asked me, can I juggle? I wasn't going in for any kind of job. I was going to be manning a, retail till, selling ride photos and various other things, climbing frames and so on. And they asked if I could juggle. The answer was no. I still got the job. And they tried to teach us to juggle in our induction training. And I still failed.
But we'll perhaps come back to the juggling when we talk about what we're about to talk about later, I suspect.
Let's see. Let's see if we make our way back there. Okay, well, on to some real questions then, Nick, if I get to start and I get to give you a little grilling. So first thing about skills, which we've already talked about a few times on this podcast, I wanted to ask you about skills inflation. We hear a lot about that, like job ads asking for more and more skills, even for entry-level roles. So from your perspective, what's driving that trend? And how should organizations rethink what skills actually matter for success?
Yeah, great question. And I think this is where the juggling comes in.
See what you did there?
There's an element of skills inflation there. You didn't necessarily need to juggle, but maybe they were looking for potential growth. So yeah, I think, So, as we've talked about when we've written about skills inflation, does refer to that rising average level of knowledge and ability that's expected from workers over time. Mm-hmm. In terms of the why, I think it's probably pretty multifaceted, lots of different elements to it. One is around hiring managers perhaps trying to reduce risk and perceived risks. So by listing a long list of desired skills, they're basically trying to cover all bases to make sure that nothing is lost and there's no risk of somebody turning up without everything. Possibly also around trying to anticipate change. So thinking, we don't need juggling now, but we might need it in 6 months' time. So sort of adding that into the mix as well, when perhaps that's not necessarily the right thing to be measuring at that point in time. I think often we don't have a very clear, sort of empirically grounded view of what actually predicts success in the job. So what does excellent performance really look like? What do their star performers actually do? Do we know that? Can people make the time and the effort to understand that? Or do they just, as we said, cover all of their bases? I think there's another element of this that probably relates to the world that we live in terms of technology and search optimization and all of that good stuff. In that, when we're putting a job ad out, we want to catch a wide candidate pool. We want to impress candidates. We want to make the job sound strategic. We want to use flashy job titles. So I think there's that element to it as well, trying to impress people. But in doing that, you can also be putting people off from applying as well. And there's a lot of research around that sort of things. So yeah, I think there's this pressure to look strategic and to impress. You get these bloated wish lists essentially, and then they put these unrealistic expectations on the hires that we are making. I think what you also asked me, how can we, what can we do about this? How can we fix it? I guess it sort of relates back to most of the points that I've made. So we need to understand what matters. What are the skills that we truly need for this role? What are those must-haves? So not continuing to ask for a degree in engineering just because that's what we've always done, but unpack that role in a more systematic manner. Do we need a degree? Don't we? Are all these things that we're asking for actually relevant? We can do that using techniques such as job analysis, statistical validation. They can form a really great foundation for understanding the role. What are those soft skills? What are the hard skills that we need? What are the must-haves? What are the nice-to-haves? We can also be speaking to high-performing job holders, so understanding the challenges and demands of the role from their perspective. But then also, we're trying to balance this sort of skills inflation with also acknowledging that, there is what's the strategic direction of the organisation? What's the organisation's priorities and challenges, and what are the implications of those on the role as well? What will the role holders need to be successful in the longer term? I guess the key thing is we have to just admit defeat and accept that change is the only constant in life. We need to look for those people with the potential to learn new skills as well. Looking at what they need now, but also looking for those people that are likely to be able to operate in a fast-changing, dynamic environment where they're going to need to reskill, upskill, relearn, unlearn, and to be able to succeed and thrive going forward.
That's a really full, complex answer. It makes me think the load on those TA teams to do that kind of analysis ahead of any hiring, especially when they're under pressure to hire so regularly, is a lot. And I guess that's where, I use psych expertise to come in and help with that kind of analysis and the tools and techniques to really drill down to what the skills are that matter.
It can feel very painful, and time consuming at the outset, but there's literally no point assessing somebody unless you know what you're assessing for, because they're just not going to perform well in the job. It is going to cost you more time and more money in the longer term if you don't know, how to build a good assessment. I can't stress enough how important it is to understand what the role requirements are and to build your assessment around that rather than rinse and repeat, despite the fact it might feel really painful at the point when you're having to do that exercise.
I think that rinse and repeat idea leads me into sort of my next question about the shifting skills landscape as well. You talked about what future skills are, because I know we've often talked about, I think even this morning when we were discussing something else, you said what my role looked like 18 months ago is different now with things like AI coming in. So you often talk about how the skills employers value today can look very different, obviously, from the past. And then flipping that forward, what shifts are the most significant right now? I said AI, we'll talk about that. And how do you see assessment science keeping up with the pace of that change? Because obviously it really fundamentally, I guess there's some fundamentals, and we've talked about that before, that underpin what you look for and how the assessment science works.
Yeah, so I guess first part of that question was around what changes are we seeing, what are the shifts that we're seeing in what really matters. Obviously, we've talked about AI at length and new technology, so that's part of setting the scene for why change is so prevalent. Also, things like working remotely, geography becomes less of a factor. But then that also means that sort of cultural diversity is more important. Pace of change is so much quicker in business and, other organisations now than it ever was. I think with all that in mind, generally, we're looking for those people that will stay up to date with technology and will adapt to the different challenges that are going to be thrown at them, the people that learn quickly, that want to learn and that thrive in that fast-paced environment, favour variety over a very narrow remit, and are happy to sort of turn the hands to other elements. So as technology is picking up a lot of the tasks that humans used to do, we see a shift in focus or more emphasis on those soft skills. So the things that the computers, the technology can't do. So we're talking about things like communication and teamwork, like genuine human empathy, influencing skills. AI is not going anywhere. So we need to be comfortable integrating AI into our daily tasks. So being open to doing that, learning about what it can do for us, but also understanding the risks and the challenges that AI brings as well. It's not as simple as some might think, or you just start using it. There's a lot more to it. So yeah, technology skills, related skills are definitely on the rise. I think conversely, the research is showing us that things like reading, writing, maths, manual dexterity, precision, attention to detail tend to be seeing a decline over time as well, because obviously we've got a lot of those checks and balances being put into technology for us. So yes, it's certainly an interesting time to be alive, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think we've said it before as well on previous podcasts. Like it's the pace of change that's so real and like visceral now, I think, for all of us, and how, things might have changed more slowly over 5 to 10 years, but now we're looking, 6 months, 12 months, and that can feel quite overwhelming sometimes. But yeah, I think for me, outside the IO psych expertise, obviously, the concept of skills is quite helpful for that. I think it feels more tangible somehow. I think probably because it's got the parallel in hard skills that everyone sort of knows what like that kind of a skill is. That, you can make the kind of cognitive leap to soft skills and then understand a bit more and break things down in a way that I think, for me, not being a psych, competencies always felt a little bit more conceptual or, sophisticated, even though there's a lot of similarities. We've talked about that too. So I think skills sort of help maybe navigate that and feel a little bit more broken down into something that you can organize and reorganize as the landscape around you changes, I suppose.
Is it my turn now? Can I take the helm and ask you some questions?
I think so. You could take the wheel.
Okay.
Turn the tables.
Okay, so we've talked about AI in this podcast before, and today as well. It's a regular theme. How are you seeing it enhance the assessment experience, both in terms of efficiency for recruiters and engagement for candidates?
Okay, well, I'll take the buzzword part first.
Yep.
I think probably regardless of the industry you're in, AI used intentionally can definitely add value, but the buzzword accusation comes in when it's sort of AI for AI's sake. And I think something that I know and remember you said before, Nick, about the founding principles of psychometric assessment design also holds true, like on my side of the house. If we stick to product principles, we're not trying to fit a solution, AI, to a problem. It's like, what's the problem we're looking to solve? And then you ideate conceptually and technically, and AI may be part of that solution, or it may not. And speaking of the technicality, like the buzzword accusation also comes into play with sort of AI washing. So you'll find a lot of products claiming that something is AI when actually it's just algorithms or calculations or automation in some way. And these claims are really using the term AI in the loosest way possible. So that's like the buzzword thing. Like there's a few layers going on, but when it's used intentionally, I think, to answer your other part of your question, AI has a lot of genuinely helpful utility in the assessment experience, like productivity gains around administrative process for recruiters and hiring managers, like taking on tasks within pre-hire screening, candidate correspondence, interview scheduling, note-taking, guidance and support for candidates, bots and, easy instant response type things, data analysis and more, like a lot of the regular desk work, I think, that is industry agnostic around planning and organization and analyzing data and reporting. Obviously, again, with all the usual checks and balances you make with AI, like don't just blindly trust some analysis, check, dig into the data, like, don't just give it a document to analyze and then run with it, But I think from that side, the administrative recruiter, hiring manager side, that's one thing. But I think then with the candidate experience specifically, like this is where it becomes a bit more exciting and innovative, because generative AI can start to be explored in terms of immersive and engaging experiences that are truly novel per candidate. And we're experimenting with that ourselves, as you know. And it's not easy because the AI landscape is changing at pace and there are very real constraints in terms of viability and, of course, scientific rigor that we need to maintain as part of an assessment process, like in our industry specifically. But it's a fun challenge, a bit like you were saying earlier, the technology has unlocked a lot of opportunity for doing these sorts of things that we didn't have previously. From a multimedia perspective, I think Gen AI brings a whole new layer of lower effort, higher impact production values, which done right can really enhance candidate engagement and maintain an authenticity that should ultimately result in higher validity, like you were saying, because the engagements feel more realistic. And I think, again, the scalability of the technology, the speed with which you can create multimedia visuals, etc., in a way that wasn't possible even 5 years ago. That's really exciting and it feels innovative. And I think it just allows us to evolve the assessment experience faster than we used to be able to.
Feels like we're having a different conversation to the one we were having 12, 18 months ago, which was very much how do we protect the assessments in the light of AI?
Yes.
But now it's how do we improve the assessments in light of AI, which is a very different conversation. I don't think we've necessarily solved the first one as an industry. I think, there's made some great steps in SOVA, for example, and, see other people doing exactly the same. So, yeah, not necessarily solved all of that, but it does feel really exciting to be harnessing AI to improve an assessment rather than worrying about what impact it's going to have on candidate test taking.
Yeah. And like you say, we haven't solved that and that hasn't gone away and that will continue to be the case. But as we always used to say to each other at the time, there's always been concerns around integrity well before AI entered the picture. Candidates will always cheat. That's just a fact of life. So I think it's a really interesting dichotomy of the two sides of it, of like the opportunities it gives and obviously the ever evolving challenges as the AI becomes more sophisticated. So things that used to work as a safeguard no longer work the same way. Keeps us on our toes, like you said.
So you've talked there about both recruiters and candidates, but you've mentioned that when you are working on assessment platforms, you're not designing just for one user, not just for two, but for three users. So you've got your candidates, your recruitment teams, but also your buyers and your decision makers, the people that are making the purchase. How do you balance their needs without compromising the experience for any of those groups?
Well, this is a perpetual challenge for product teams where there are multiple sort of users in the mix. But go back to product principles, it's truly understanding your user and your buyer personas. Like that's how we'd separate them. And like that's the dream, not compromising for any group. But the reality is, and we talked about trade-offs already, there are always trade-offs. And knowing the personas intimately and speaking to real users, customers, and prospects regularly to understand which are the most impactful problems to solve for each group and which things are like maybe nice to haves, or in an ideal world, the product term being delighters, stuff that's going to, really raise your game above and be the essential thing that a certain group might want. As with any multitasking, you have to keep making progress incrementally across the user groups so that no group's left behind. And yeah, you sometimes do get those great features that have something for everyone. But I think the main thing is considering all of those personas at the outset and being clear about what a feature is delivering for each group, which problems it's solving, so that you can articulate that value to users. Because I think the clarity in positioning of whatever you're bringing, out in your platform is essential as well. So I think since all those groups in our instance, like interrelate, it doesn't mean that if we're building a feature that actually is for really focused on candidates, obviously there is a interest and a will on the recruitment side of the house and obviously the buyer stakeholders, like that's a good thing. So even if it's not directly impactful to a certain persona or user group, as long as you're clear about what value it's bringing, I think that goes a long way as well.
Yes, I guess it's unusual for a new feature to be detrimental to any one of those groups. It might just, it doesn't enhance their experience of the platform. Yeah.
I think in fact, you might be doing something wrong if it's negatively going to impact any of your key user groups.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you say, it could just be a sort of neutral experience
Mm,
or just unimpactful,
mm,
but they're, articulated well, positioned well, because you've understood the challenges that each group have, then they should understand the benefit that it brings,
yeah. And why
their
one thing's
colleagues, if
being
not
prioritized.
themselves.
Yeah, yeah. Um, okay. The next question that I've got relates more to the candidate experience specifically. So sometimes candidate experience might clash with psychometric rigor or with operational constraints.
Mhm.
What are some practical design choices that your team have had to make that make assessments feel they're engaging and transparent without watering down the science? So it's balance. How do you balance those
Yeah.
things?
It's when we come to fisticuffs in all those meetings. So, as you know, Nick, we have to be highly collaborative when working on new assessments and assessment experiences. Now, more than ever, as we were saying earlier, um, I've heard you say in previous podcasts that good assessment design does not work against UX or UI principles. And in fact, I'm pretty sure we had a science or fiction question about IO Psychs being the original UX designers. If you remember that one, I can't remember who we asked, but
Yes.
I remember it well. And I think maybe we came to the conclusion that they were like that, usually there is a lot of alignment. So we do sing from the same hymn sheet. And I'd say with assistive technology enhancements and guidelines like UCAG, it possibly becoming easier rather than harder. Like we don't have to sacrifice design quality due to the science, because things like accessibility toolbars give us flexibility that we didn't used to have. We don't have to strip that back a design because a user with an assistive toolbar can be in control of what they need for, how
Mm,
it needs to be displayed for their own requirements. And we don't have to try and do this sort of one size fits all approach because we have
right.
something that allows them to customize it the way they need. I think as long as we bake in that kind of compatibility and we're already collectively focused on making assessments feel fair, engaging, transparent, and scientifically sound, which we are, they're founding principles, certainly for us. And we do that from both angles, from psych
Mm,
and product. So I think other advancements in technology also mean we can easily do things like A/B testing and get smart about how we standardize and re-standardize assessments and do other kind of validation studies too. So I'm not sure we need to compromise in a way that we once
mm,
did. And I think in terms of practicality and a practical approach, I'd say I simply personally think it's right to design with accessibility in mind because that enhances the experience for everyone. And I'm pretty sure that both of our teams are very conscious of that, are
yeah.
aligned, as I
Yeah. We're
said.
also pushing in the same direction, but perhaps just coming at it on a different road.
Yeah, exactly. Again, it's a bit like that multidisciplinary approach, like where we can also fill in gaps for each other because you're focused on, from your side and I'm, but I
Mm,
think practically and operationally, which you asked about as well, maybe it's a different matter. And maybe one more for you. Like we've talked about before about time pressure and like everyone's buying into stereotypes about Gen Z and that they don't read or they want everything in video format or they can't pay attention for more than a few minutes. And so while I'm probably the first to say to you, well, we've got 3 screens of instructions. Could that be one? Or could we make that a video or whatever? Or, okay, this is 30 minutes, but could it be 20 or 15?
mhm.
I know you're already acutely aware of that and already thinking along those lines. But equally, I know that you always advocate for making sure we get data from our assessment experiences that is accurate and meaningful. And you can't do that in 3 minutes. In
Yeah.
fact, a new client recently told us, having had their heads turned by a competitor, promising just that, like only that they found out that it was
Mm,
too good to be true. So I
mm.
think some of
Yeah.
those practical challenges are not actually internal, but external and expectation setting with, prospects.
Yeah, I think there is an element of face validity with that as well. If you've got a candidate that comes along and they're given an assessment that takes 3, 4, 5 minutes,
Mhm.
that there's a nervousness around
Yeah,
that. And
like
I'm
have they
hearing that
known me?
anecdotally.
Yeah.
But are they really getting to the bottom of who I am and what I'm all about? But at the same time, we don't want, back in a past life, we'd have people sat in front of an assessment battery of tests for hours and hours and hours. And, even just a verbal, a logical and a personality questionnaire could take someone 1 to 2 hours to complete. And so I think we have to make the most of new technology and new analytical approaches as well to really try and fine tune our assessments so that concept of they don't have to be mutually exclusive.
Mhm.
It's finding the sweet spot between all of those factors that really matter.
Yeah, that's about balance, isn't it, I think?
Yes. Okay, Caroline, thank you. So I found today really, really insightful and interesting and a bit fun
Likewise.
as well. So a little bit different to what we normally do. So thanks for sharing your thoughts. Is there anything that you'd like our listeners to take away from today's session? Maybe it's just that we should get guests back in again.
I think again, like I think what I really do enjoy about working with you, Nick, is that the fact that you can apply those psychological principles. I think I've learned from you and apply some of that in what we're doing in UI and UX design. That operant conditioning. That there are things around that kind of conditioning principle that you can apply to like good design and stuff like that. And I think it's a really, I feel really privileged to be able to work with psychs on the daily because it's a really, I mean, everyone's fascinated by, psychology and, the human condition. And I think it's a real value add to our little world of SaaS tech to have that additional set of experts in the business, which you don't get in every business, certainly not all tech startups. So, I mean, I've just been reflecting on that as you've talked about all of your psychometric knowledge and skill. But yeah, and just shout out to all the psychs in our company.
Yeah, I agree. I
Thank
think
you.
the teams learn from one another, don't they? We've spent hours labouring over some very small tweaks to images to the system,
Mhm.
but it's worth it. It's worth the effort, and we're all doing it for the right reasons, which does make it easier to have those conversations.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks for hanging out with us on The Score. If you enjoyed this conversation on all things psychology and product, don't miss what's coming next. New episodes drop every 2 weeks on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your talent acquisition insight.